Hey guys, it's me, Tara Palmeri, your feared and fearless political reporter, just trying to break down this wild story that is breaking in America. Donald Trump's top cabinet officials, his national security team, they were using their personal cell phones to text over an encrypted app called Signal War Plans. And they mistakenly included a journalist in this exchange. That's how haphazard it was all handled. I'm talking about Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, Mike Waltz, Vice President J.D. Vance, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, the most important people in this administration. They were communicating in an unclassified, unsecure way through their personal cell phones because you can't download the app to a government phone. That's how unsecure it is. I learned that in a conversation with Brett Bruen. He's a former National Security Council official under Obama, but he also worked under George W. Bush at the State Department. He's willing to criticize both sides, saying the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, needs to resign for including that journalist in the group chat. But then there's Pete Hegseth, who sent the war plans to a group chat. It doesn't matter which political party this would be about. It is incredibly damaging.
Talk to me about how classified information is typically exchanged and what level of classification would you give war plans?
Yeah, and let me pick up on a point that the White House, Caroline Leavitt, is pushing back on. These weren't war plans. And yet, Jeffrey Goldberg knew the exact timing of Saturday strikes. That, in and of itself, is a major operational security issue because U.S. warplanes, U.S. Military officials would have been in the zone of operations, Tehran, Russia, other adversaries, the Houthis themselves, might have known because this information was on a whole range of personal devices. Signal is not on your government issued cell phone. These were personal devices of Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, Pete Hegseth.
So you couldn't even upload Signal to a government device.
You can't. And for a whole variety of reasons, because, well, Signal certainly has a level of security. It does not have the level of security required to have even the most basic classified conversations. And, your question, Tara, is what level are we talking about here? There are basically a wide range of levels of sensitivity. The elemental level was essentially the one that Hillary's emails, we remember those from back in 2016. Hillary's emails were probably on the most unsensitive level.
You wouldn't use an email for the communication that went out because that's not top secret enough. Because, I'm sure all of their communications, Director of National Intelligence, CIA Director, Vice President, Secretary of State, Secretary, Defense Secretary, all their communications are clearly incredibly targeted at all time by China, Iran. Wouldn't you agree with that?
They have their numbers, no doubt. The level of penetration. I remember when I was at the White House, our unclassified official email system was hacked by the Russians. We know that the Chinese hacked into the Office of Personnel Management's data system. And again, they're getting through several layers of security that are not on the personal cell phones of Pete Hegseth, Mike Waltz, Marco Rubio. There's nothing special about your personal cell phone. That's just like your or my cell phone that we're talking on now. And so it is a level of vulnerability. We've all had instances in which we intended to write something on Signal and maybe it went onto Twitter or onto WhatsApp. I mean,
Floppy fingers. Who hasn't been,
the ability just to copy that information and to place it somewhere else is a vulnerability. The notifications popping up maybe as Marco Rubio's having coffee and sitting around with some friends in Miami. I mean, there's just any number of problems with this from the standpoint of not just, diplomatic secrets, not just, sensitive conversations. We are talking about the lives of our men and women in uniform. And that's where I think we've got to, keep a focus on how potentially dangerous, how potentially bad this could have been.
Yeah.
And look, as you know, I called for Jake Sullivan to be fired after the reckless retreat from Afghanistan.
Right.
I think there has to be. Republicans have got to take a long, hard look in the mirror and say, if those kinds of incidents, which did not involve the National Security Advisor himself putting the lives of American service members in jeopardy, warranted calls for his removal. This certainly does. And I think we have got to have a standard because, Trump was out this morning saying, well, he's a good guy and he learned a lesson. You cannot run our national security team if you have committed this level of security violation. I mean, this is the kind of violation that wasn't, a minor, we're going to put a
Yeah.
pink slip. They used to, the Marines in the embassies overseas, if you left a classified, even a sensitive document out, you would get a pink slip. And that was a warning that would go on your record as you had committed a violation of the Classified Documents Act. Well, Mike Waltz not only earns a pink slip for this, he should get the pink slip and get booted out of the West Wing. You cannot perform these functions and ask the men and women of our military, the men and women of the intelligence service, the men and women of the State Department, the National Security Council to protect less classified information, and you get off the hook for sharing, imminent military operations.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I just learned this that you couldn't upload Signal to, an actual federal device that you're offered. So thank you for telling me that because it's so unsecure. I mean, we use that as journalists. I will be honest with you, I use Signal regularly to talk to my sources, particularly sources in the Trump administration. And this morning, I was surprised to hear from a Trump ally that the conversation that's happening right now is whether Pete Hegseth will need a pardon after all of this, because he was ultimately the one who sent the war plans out unwittingly, perhaps unknowingly, that there was a journalist that was on the group chat that was added by Mike Waltz. Now, based on my interactions with the White House, I am sensing that Mike Waltz is the one who's going to take the fall. They did not like that in my posts and in my reporting that I had, really said, is this something that, that really Hegseth should have been aware of who he was sending to. He should have been more aware of the mode of communication. I mean, he was one who ultimately sent the communications about the war plans. And also, like, this guy is so obsessed with culture wars and removing, trans people from the military. Like, maybe he should have spent a little bit more time in classified documents corner, learning exactly how this goes about. So yeah, just from the sense I'm getting of the pushback towards, blaming Pete Hegseth, who they spent a lot of political capital on getting confirmed. I mean, they spent a ton of money intimidating Joni Ernst, who had questions, but the NSA, the National Security Advisor, is someone the president appoints, doesn't need to go through confirmation. So they can get rid of Mike Waltz and have another NSA tomorrow. And I'm sure there are a lot of people that want that job. But to get a defense secretary confirmed again, one of their guys who already had a list of issues that they fought hard against, I think that's the problem right now. So that's just to get you guys into the political sphere of this all, what my sources are telling you, just to know what the inside conversation that's happening in Trump world right now. But would you think that Pete Hegseth is the one who would ultimately need a pardon after this if he's prosecuted for sending war plans out like this?
Yeah, and Tara, this is what we shouldn't lose sight of. The Signal chat was set up. Hegseth may not have known that Jeffrey Goldberg was on the Signal chat. But there is no scenario in which the Secretary of Defense sends out military plans on a commercial app. That just should never have happened. And to your point, he needs, and all of them, quite frankly, at the minimum, need to be retrained on the handling of classified information because there is no, I went through extensive training as a junior diplomat. And I remember I walked into the Reagan Library as the old Situation Room. And I realized that I still had my cell phone on me. And I had this moment of panic because you don't bring your cell phone into the SCIF, into that sensitive department of the White House, of the State Department, where this kind of information is discussed, the notion that they're sending out that information on a personal phone, on a commercial app, is in and of itself a, a crime. I mean, let's just be clear about this. You are not allowed, even if you're Secretary of Defense, he does not have the authority to declassify that information. That information put lives in danger, and there should be legal consequences for it. There should be political consequences as well. But I think we have to hold a certain standard that when you put the lives of American service members in danger, you are going to pay a legal price as well as a political price.
I mean, listen, I do not think that any of these people will be prosecuted during the Trump administration. But in 4 years, they could be prosecuted by a Democratic administration. And that is when, Pete Hegseth would need a pardon. So the question is whether or any of these people would need a pardon. So the question is whether Donald Trump would pre-pardon them his way out, in case they ended up facing some sort of prosecution. But I want to get back into the idea of a SCIF, because this is obviously how you communicate these type of plans, right? Not over communications like email, not considered secure enough, since these people are constantly being targeted by our adversaries. But a SCIF is it can happen anywhere, because you could be on a plane and we could be in the middle of executing a war plan. You could be on Air Force One. You could be at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, there was a lot of actual the administration during the first time, I remember, had faced a lot of criticism over the fact that they held a SCIF in the middle of the dining room at Mar-a-Lago and that there were guests nearby. Can you kind of you remember that as well, right?
I do. And let's just clarify for the audience, that wasn't a SCIF. And it was criticized because, yes, at Mar-a-Lago, anywhere the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State travel, there will be a room set up, and it has to be exhaustively cleared by whether it's diplomatic security or Pentagon security, others who establish that there are no listening devices, there are no cameras, and then all of the windows, all of the potential ways somebody could try to snoop in to that room are closed off. All of your cell phones, again, coming back to whether it's a personal cell phone or a government issued cell phone, all of that has to sit outside of the SCIF. You cannot bring that in, and you cannot bring in any information. I remember, there's a process. If you print off a classified piece of paper, not only does it have the classification on the top, on the bottom of that piece of paper, you then had to put on, and we've probably seen in movies or in television, put on a cover page on top of that. So these are the layers of literal layers, and the levels to which classified information, even at a basic level, is handled. So then on top of that you would have all of this information being passed around, with emojis, and quite frankly, anyone else who's around any one of these members, and it wasn't a small chat, was potentially exposed to that information. There, family members of Secretary Hegseth or of Mike Waltz do not have security clearance. They do not have the clearance to see this information. So it's really...
So if it's on their personal phone, the wife or the son or the kid knows the password, they can go on and see dad's world plans on Signal. Here's another thing. Signal's a third-party provider, and like you said, it cannot be uploaded to a government phone. Signal, yes, it's an encrypted app, right? So that means that the messaging is destroyed after 4 weeks. Is that right? But
you said that.
Ever hold on to this? Is there concerns about that as well?
I mean, one, there's a records issue here, because all of our communications in government, certainly in the National Security Council, gets archived, and you have a responsibility. This issue came up yesterday in some of the coverage that Mike Waltz has set essentially a disappearing message function to this chat after a week, after 4 weeks. So those conversations are not available for the National Archives. There's a reason why we store that information, so that, obviously for historic reasons, but even if ever there are questions about the process, about the legality of some of these decisions. So, and Tara, there are probably a number of other chats that are, set up on Signal, including this notion of disappearing chats. All of those government officials have a responsibility to preserve those records. And if they're not doing it, they're violating the law.
Thank you so much, Brett, for your time. I know you have to jump. Thank you all for joining. Please subscribe to my Substack. I managed to get Brett on Substack, by the way. So subscribe for his too. To his too. He might actually start writing. Who knows? But I am obviously a new independent journalist. I hope that you will subscribe to the Red Letter. Please consider becoming a paid subscriber to support my independent journalism. Got to keep the lights on. Cheers.